I was just talking about how we choose presidents based on their height or their handsomeness or whatever it is, but really what they do is they manage. Presidents manage a big, huge organization. But here's the problem. Most of them don't come from a place of power in terms of management. They're often weak at managing these components of the executive branch. Why? Because they propose good policies. They're out trying to be popular. But they may have managed a state as a governor. They maybe managed a set of businesses. They might have only managed a small congressional staff. Really, when they get elected, they've got to figure out how to run a gigantic bureaucracy. And if you think about what we were talking about with span of control and org theory, we talk about the 15 cabinet level departments. The presidents have to deal with massive amount of time management. If you gave 15 minutes to each of the 15 department heads inside the cabinet, you would spend an entire 8-hour day talking to them. And that's just a 15-minute update on what's going on in their organization. So how do they manage them? Well, they appoint people to run these departments who they know, who they're politically affiliated with. And interestingly, they're often disappointed when they count on cabinet level members to do their jobs. Why? Well, most of these cabinet level members are political loyalists. They've been chosen because of maybe something they've done in the past, but they largely don't have a lot of experience managing bureaucracy. And they also have competing desires and interests. They want to get a bigger, more important position. Presidents only serve for 4 years, so they know they're out of a job at the maximum 8 years, probably more like 4, but honestly more like 2. So they may be able to come in, work on their own agenda. They've got to get a reputation out of this. They're trying to respond to the president's demands. The presidents can make crazy demands out of them. So it's hard to always do what the president asks, and they're trying to manage staff who've been inside the bureaucracy for maybe 40 years. The other thing that's hard is that there are lots of different departments who do different things, and we unfortunately have overlapping jurisdictional boundaries on some issues, like, let's say, terrorism. That involves money. That involves the Defense Department. It involves the State Department. So each of these different agencies they're trying to work on terrorism, but how does the president step in to make sure that there's a clear, coherent strategy for dealing with terrorism when he's got at least 3 different departments arguing that they should do things differently? And every time that these agencies butt heads, they have a reputation that they're trying to advance or solidify, and the president has to figure out how to lead all these. So ultimately what happens is the president hires a big staff to try and coordinate all these efforts, and really the president is off, doing a lot of other things, policy-related stuff, and he turns over a lot of that management to staff and support. Now, inside the executive office in the White House, this is essentially the president's management staff and the decision-making bodies. And, in the 1930s, they had like 570 employees, and today they have nearly 2,000. We found that there's a lot of support staff there. It's this large, multi-layered, hard-to-coordinate bureaucracy. And you think, well, who's the most important person in the office of the president? Well, is it the head of the Secretary of State, Treasury, Defense, part of the National Security Council? It's probably the Chief of Staff. The person who coordinates the president's schedule and agenda gets to dictate who gets to talk to the president, who doesn't. And they're kind of a liaison between the entire bureaucracy. Inside the executive office of the president, we have all sorts of things that we have to do. Office of Administration, how do we get, all the forms and paperwork, the schedules, the calendars, the travel plans? Totally fine. He lives in the White House, so we have a division of the executive office that deals with the residents. We have a chef, we have cleaning people, we have interior decorators, we have all sorts of stuff. Then we have the office of the vice president. The vice president is elected along with the president. They exist outside of political control of Congress. So what does the vice president do? Well, he actually has his own staff. The more important functions inside the executive office end up being the Office of Management and Budget, which we're going to talk about. That's also the largest executive office in the president. The National Security Council, which we'll also talk about. Council of Economic Advisors is important, Council on Environmental Quality, U.S. Trade Representatives, National Drug Control Policy. Essentially, the executive office of the president is where the president can really effectively manage the bureaucracy. So the Office of Management and Budget has come under some scrutiny because what it does is it helps control the flow of money. It proposes the presidential budget. It analyzes budget proposals. It makes recommendations to the president about how to spend money, how to not spend money. and it oversees fiscal administration. So, for example, the Office of Management and Budget is the place where if the president wants to slow down or speed up money, he directs that through the Office of Management and Budget inside the Executive Office of the President. Well, what does that really mean? Well, it means that if your agency wants more money, that proposal goes through the OMB. And that's the way that the president hears your budget proposal. If you want to expand some new program, that proposal goes through the Office of Management and Budget, because we're talking about money. Now, if your agency is not performing very well, the president can slow down the amount of money or slow down the speed at which you get money. It can hold money. It can allocate money quickly if you're doing really well, and it'll track how you're spending money and how you're performing according to what the president wants. We get scorecards from the OMB about which agencies are performing well. This is the major tool by which the president can use levers on those agencies to get the job done that they want. The National Security Council deals with foreign policy, how we integrate domestic, foreign, and military policies regarding national security. So if we're thinking about going to war, if we're thinking about spying on somebody, if we're thinking about how we provide aid to some foreign country, this all goes through the National Security Council. Now, the National Security Council is important because these people largely exist outside the purview of Congress. The same with the Office of Management and Budget. They're part of the Executive Office of the President. So the National Security Council is able to give good policy to the president, good perspective to the president, because generally they don't report to Congress on the things that they hear from the president. This is a very, very important role for the president to fill, because he has to be trusted, and they have essentially every time the president makes some foreign policy, he does it through the National Security Council. They're able to provide information to him about what to do, what not to do, and these are highly trusted advisors to the president. Very, very powerful. Increasingly, the president's used a variety of different ways to coordinate the work of the bureaucracy, and then inside those executive agencies and inside the bureaucracy, we see this rise of reliance on computer systems, or the rise of e-government. It's a new sort of approach, not new, but the way that we're interacting with citizens and the way that we're doing executive functions and the functions of government is changing as technology is changing. So think about this. We share information via databases and communication systems. We're able to coordinate the efforts of different levels of government just through simple computer systems. So if I want to look at what's going on with the EPA, I can track every one of their enforcement agencies. Let's say I want to see what's going on with the transportation, Department of Transportation. They have their websites up as well. Same happens at the state and local levels. We're increasingly giving more information to citizens, but also other levels of government using complex electronic computer systems. Now, the other thing is, like, we have changed the way that we provide services. So, for example, we process taxes through the IRS by clicking and uploading our tax forms, which means we hire less people. That also means that the IRS audits could audit more people, or that they can process information faster. They can also share that information using Freedom of Information Act requests, or through Congress, General Accountability Office. They can send that information very, very quickly to different levels of government to provide that service. If you live in a state with a Department of Motor Vehicles that's got a website, like California, for example, I can renew my driver's license there. I can renew my vehicle registrations there. I could submit building permits on systems like that. And the reason why we're talking about using e-government is that it coordinates the behavior of the executive branch, but it also improves the service that the executive branch does, because we can write these rules into systems, and we don't need as many people there. It can greatly improve government services, help citizens connect to government more easily, but not everybody has equal access. So people who maybe don't have computers or access to the internet, it slows them down. There's some changes in how organizations behave because of this. There's issues about security and privacy that we all have to deal with. But increasingly, part of the point of talking about this is that the president is managing using different tools, and one of those tools is using electronic resources. For example, George W. Bush used an electronic system to manage, to review the the performance of each cabinet level office and agency during the time of his presidency. He had these color-coded schemes that would say, hey, this agency's not doing well, there's a red, and this agency's doing really well based on some of these client satisfaction surveys, or using their budget efficiently or effectively. So he can identify problems and then use the levers of the Office of Management Budget or send his staff down to help coordinate that behavior so that it can improve. So as we increase the use of these technological tools, it increases our ability to manage the executive branch. Now the executive branch is huge, and we have to coordinate all these behaviors. It's really complex. There's potential for overlaps in jurisdictions, and when there is, we have friction points. So we've got to manage those relationships. We also have places that we didn't even know existed as problems, and so we have to identify which organization is going to take care of that. So we have gaps. Organizations have to find out ways to solve coordination problems, but they also, every time we solve some problem, we create new problems, like accountability or security or freedom or privacy. Now, as we have these interconnected agencies that work to solve problems, we need to break these down into manageable parts to share them across agencies. And this is difficult. And also there's this additional difficulty of decision-making staff and sort of support administrative staff, and who does what role and how do we do that. Managing the bureaucracy is a complex process. The president has a difficult job. This difficult job extends to governors who have the same problem and mayors who have the same problem. These issues are replicated at the federal, state, and local levels. And most of the time, we don't elect politicians based on their management capability. We elect them on their popularity. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that we have to rely more on staff to do the work of the government.